Welcome to Transcendent Psychotherapist. I'm redoing an episode I did a little while ago. I'm trying to make it slightly shorter and more to the point. So we're exploring the question of pantheism and considering it in the context also of the idealism of idealist philosopher Bernardo Kastrup. Now, but Bernardo is, in a sense, a kind of pantheist. So he equates the cosmos with God, or mind at large, as he often calls it. I'm just going to explore, as part of the series that I'm doing, what pantheism is, or some just sort of thoughts about what we might mean by pantheism. So pantheism, pantheos, means, from the Greek, all God. Pantheism, pan being all. Now, there's a variety of types of pantheism. So you have a strict kind of pantheism, which just sort of says all equals God in a kind of identity relationship. God is all is God, okay? But there are also other varieties of pantheism, which kind of talk more about kind of everything participating in God, or everything being kind of somehow God infused, or, maybe all being in the mind of God. Obviously, Bernardo's view is it kind of is mind, and that is what God is. So kind of variety there. And one of the things that's worth noting is that there's a real overlap between pantheism and panentheism and theism. It's not really thoroughly clear where the line starts and stops in a way. For example, even in the New Testament, you have someone like St. Paul predicating the idea that God will become all in all. What does that mean by that? If everything kind of is eventuating to the point where God is all in all, is that like God is infusing everything? What does it mean? Does the all retain its identity in some way, or does it all get flattened out in God? I won't get into the New Testament theology here. That's not really my goal, but interesting that there's that overlap in some ways. So one of the things I find really interesting, and I came across this in an article by Brian Leftow, philosopher of religion, but I've been thinking the same thing a few days before, so I found this really interesting seeing it here. And that's the question of what you stress, because with the word pantheism, we could stress the pan part, or we could stress the theism part. Okay, so we could say, underline the pan and say all is somehow divine or divinized, stressing the kind of many things and their divinity as real. Or we could stress the theism part at the end. So there we're stressing the divinity of all things. Now that might sound like it's the same thing, but there is a bit of a difference. The question really then becomes, what in a sense dominates? What swallows up what? Are we characterizing God by the all things, by the pan, or are we characterizing all things by the divine, or the God, or just God? So we could talk, for example, about Hinduism and Vedanta. So in Hinduism, Brahman, loosely God, is the ultimate real, and because of the way Hinduism thinks, is the only reality. Okay, so everything else is a kind of illusion, or as they call it in Hinduism, Maya. Okay, so there you have pantheism, but the cosmos, or the all, is somehow not real in a full sense in the same way. That's called acosmism. So the cosmos is a sort of illusion. So it's pantheism, but the stress there is on the theism and and Brahman, if you like, that concept swallowing up the pan. Now, Bernardo talks about mind at large, and he defines it really as the subjective substrate of consciousness that reality is. So everything really is mental, a field of consciousness in which everything appears, which you and I appear, which our consciousness is a kind of fragment of that, a dissociation within that broader conscious field. And he says, well, his mind at large, he often calls that God, is it has things in common with the typical theism ideas, the omni ideas. So he says, that it's omnipresent because, well, mind is the only thing there is, so it's thoroughly present to itself. It's omnipotent in the sense that nothing happens within that field of consciousness that doesn't happen by its own lights. It's so omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient as well, in the sense that it just is a knowing field, so it knows everything of itself. So there's omniscience there. It lacks omnibenevolence in Bernardo's model, which is obviously a classic theistic view of God. The thing we might want to think about, however, is that Bernardo's view is what we might call a naturalist pantheism. Okay, so that God is just kind of characterized by the cosmos. God just is this mental, subjective cosmos. And that's a little bit different, say, from Vedanta, the Hindu philosophy, where Brahman is the ultimate reality, but the cosmos actually is an illusion. So there, in Bernardo's view, the cosmos really defines God. The Pan defines the theism. In Vedantan thought, the theism kind of defines or gobbles up the Pan. Okay, now one other question that I thought was interesting in my thinking around this, and good for those that are into Bernardo like I am, I love Bernardo's work, is the question of the theism part, because what counts as theos, what counts as God, what counts as the divine? So for Bernardo, you've got, well, the cosmos can count as the divine, but the cosmos in a sense is a thing. All right, so if you've got a thing, the question we might want to ask is, what is that? What people traditionally mean by God? Very often, in all sorts of theologies across different religions and philosophies around the world, the divine has to have something akin to what we might call ultimacy, something John Schellenberg calls ultimacy. There can be nothing further back than that thing. Now, Bernardo's mind at large satisfies that condition in a sense. The only thing I would point out, though, is that the cosmos is a kind of thing. It's not an object. It's a very, very large subject. So maybe we could debate, that Bernardo's God qualifies in this sense. It is ultimate in a sense, but it's also a kind of thing with a nature. It's a subjective thing. And one of the insights of some parts of theology, particularly, for example, in Neoplatonism, is the idea, so if you think of Plotinus, for example, is the idea that the one or ultimate God cannot be a thing, cannot be an object, or maybe even a subject among other objects or subjects. There can't be a thingness to God, because in that sense, if that is happening, it's not necessarily ultimate. So I'm going to think about this a little bit more, and not necessarily in another video, or I might do, but I'd invite you just to think and maybe put something in the comments as well. Do you think Bernardo's idea of mind at large qualifies as an ultimate? Or does it seem more like a thing that might owe its existence to something further back? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but I think it is worth thinking through in further detail. Thanks for listening. Tune in for the next episode, when I'll either be exploring more about pantheism, maybe Spinoza's pantheism, or we'll be moving into panentheism.